The rain had been falling all morning, cold and steady, turning the ground outside the colony hall into sticky mud. Lyra sat on a broken wooden bench, her thin shawl clinging to her shoulders. In her hands was a dented metal bowl, filled with something that could barely be called food, a thick gray paste with a bitter smell. Her fingers trembled from the cold as she tried to eat quickly before the rain made the paste even more watery. Through the open doorway of the great dining hall, warmth and light spilled out. Inside, rows of long tables were crowded with well-dressed aliens from the colony. Their plates piled high with steaming food. They laughed, they talked loudly, they drank sweet hot drinks. But no one even looked toward the girl sitting outside. It was as if she didn't exist. Or worse, like she wasn't worth noticing. Group of alien children ran past, splashing muddy water onto her legs. One boy shouted over his shoulder, "Enjoy your feast, half-blood." The others laughed as they disappeared inside. Lyra didn't answer. She had learned long ago that speaking back only made things worse. Far across the courtyard, a human soldier named Ethan walked along the stone path. He had been stationed here for weeks, patrolling the edges of the alien settlement as part of the peace agreement. Ethan was used to seeing strange things on alien worlds, but this made him stop. A girl, young and fragile looking, sitting alone in the rain while others feasted inside, his brow furrowed. He stood still for a moment, watching her. Something about the way she sat straight-backed, but with her head lowered, made his chest feel tight. Lyra felt eyes on her. She glanced up and saw the human for a heartbeat, their gazes locked. Then she quickly looked back down. Humans were rare here, and she didn't want to cause trouble for one. From the hall, a sharp voice rang out, "Close the door. We don't want her stench drifting in." Laughter followed. The heavy wooden door slammed shut, cutting off the warmth and light. Now the only sound was the steady hiss of rain on the roof. Ethan's hands curled into fists. He could ignore it like everyone else did. It wasn't his problem. But something inside him refused to look away. Still, he forced himself to keep walking. He didn't know the laws here. He didn't know why she was treated this way, but he promised himself he'd find out. Lyra finished the last of her paste and set the bowl down beside her. Her fingers were stiff, her clothes damp. She leaned against the wall, staring at nothing. Every day was the same. Eat outside, alone, where everyone could see. A punishment for something she had no control over: her bloodline. Her mother had been from a different alien clan, her father from another. The union was forbidden. She was the proof of their crime, and so she was marked for life. A gust of wind blew, cutting through her thin shawl. She shivered and pulled it tighter around her from the corner of her eye. She saw the human disappear around the far end of the building. She thought nothing more of it. Humans always kept to themselves. No one ever stood up for her. Why would they? Inside, the feast grew louder. The scent of roasted meat drifted through the cracks in the door, making her stomach twist painfully. Her meal never had meat, never had flavor. It was another rule: impure blood did not deserve the same food as the pure. Then, faintly, she heard boots on wet stone again. She looked up and saw the human returning. He walked straight toward her, his expression unreadable. In one hand, he carried a steaming cup. He stopped in front of her and held it out. "Here," he said simply, his voice calm but firm. Lyra stared at the cup, then at him. "I can't take that," she whispered. "You can," he replied, "and you will." She hesitated, glancing toward the hall. If anyone saw this, they would be furious. But the smell of the drink, rich, warm, and sweet, was too much. She took it, her fingers brushing his gloved hand. The heat burned against her frozen skin. She sipped, and the warmth spread through her chest. Her eyes stung not from the steam, but from something else. Ethan crouched, so they were eye level. Why? "Are you out here?" he asked quietly. She looked away. "Because I'm not one of them," she said, her voice barely above the rain. "Because my blood is wrong." Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't say anything, but inside, something was building: anger, disbelief, and a fierce urge to do something. Anything. He glanced toward the hall, hearing the laughter and the clinking of cups. Then he looked back at her. He didn't know it yet, but this was the moment everything would change, and somewhere, deep inside Lyra, for the first time in years, a small spark of hope lit. The next morning, the rain had stopped. But the ground was still wet and heavy with the smell of damp earth. Lyra walked through the marketplace with her head down, clutching a small cloth bag filled with her daily rash, barely enough to fill half a bowl around her. The market buzzed with life, colorful stalls selling fresh fruit, warm bread, and spiced meats. She didn't dare look at any of it. Those foods were not for her kind, not for the ones marked as impure. The mark was invisible to the eye, but everyone knew it was in the way others glanced at her and quickly looked away. It was in the way parents pulled their children closer when she passed. It was in the way some whispered the word half-blood like it was poison. Ethan had been watching her from across the street, blending in with the crowd. He wasn't on patrol today, but he had questions that had been clawing at him since yesterday. Why was she forced to eat outside? Why did no one help her? Why did they treat her like she was something less than alive? He spotted an older alien man selling woven baskets and approached. The man looked up, startled by the sight of a human. "What do you want, off-worlder?" the man asked, his tone cautious. "I just want to understand," Ethan replied, his voice calm. "Why is that girl treated that way?" The old man followed Ethan's gaze to where Lyra was leaving the market. His expression turned hard. "She is half-blood," he said flatly. "Her kind must follow the purity law." Ethan frowned. "What purity law?" The man leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Our bloodlines must remain clean, strong, untainted by outside clans. It is the way of our people, the way of our ancestors. If a child is born with mixed blood, they are cursed. They bring weakness, misfortune, disease, so they are marked. They cannot eat with the pure, cannot share food, cannot sit beside us. It is protection for the colony." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "That's not protection," he said. "That's cruelty." The old man's lips pressed into a thin line. "You see it as cruelty because you are not one of us, human, but it is our way, and she is lucky they allow her to live at all." The words hit Ethan like a slap. Lucky to live. He turned his head toward where Lyra had disappeared down a narrow street. Something inside him hardened. Later that day, Ethan passed by the colony's central square. There she was, again sitting outside the hall, eating alone. It wasn't raining this time, but the air was cold, and the ground beneath her was still wet. Inside, he could hear laughter, smell rich spices, and hear the clatter of plates. He noticed how some aliens glanced toward her and then turned away. A few smirked, whispering to each other. It wasn't just a rule, it was entertainment for them, a public humiliation. A group of alien youths walked past her. One of them pretending to gag dramatically as he passed. Another kicked dirt toward her bowl. Lyra didn't react. She had learned to stay still, to make herself small, to pretend it didn't hurt. Ethan stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "You shouldn't have to do this," he said quietly. She looked up, startled. Her eyes darted toward the hall, then back to him. "You don't understand," she whispered. "If I go inside, they will drag me out. If I sit with them, they will not eat. If I take food from their hands, they will burn the plate after. It's the law. Human." Ethan crouched, meeting her gaze. "What if the law is wrong?" he asked. Lyra's lips trembled in a faint, sad smile. "It doesn't matter if it's wrong," she said. It matters that they believe it's right. From across the courtyard, a heavy voice called out, "Human." Ethan straightened to see a tall alien in ornate armor striding toward them. The alien's eyes were sharp, and his presence made the other aliens nearby step back. Ethan could feel the shift in the authority this man carried. "You have no place speaking to her," the alien said coldly. "This is not your concern, offworlder. Leave." Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "She was sitting in the rain yesterday, eating alone," he said. His voice low but firm. "I made it my concern." The alien's jaw tightened. "You will regret that," he said, before turning on his heel and walking back toward the hall. Lyra looked pale, her hands trembling. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "They will punish you." Ethan glanced at her, his tone steady. "Let them try." He turned and walked away. But inside his mind, a storm was already brewing. If they thought he would ignore this, they were about to learn they were wrong. That night, as the hall lights dimmed and the colony settled into silence, Ethan sat in his quarters. He stared at the steaming mug in his hands, but didn't drink. He could still see Lyra's thin shoulders. In the cold, the way she clutched her food like it might be taken from her at any second. He could hear the old man's voice repeating those words, "lucky to live," and he knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow, he wouldn't just sit by and watch somewhere. In the dark, in the quiet space between today and tomorrow, Ethan made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. The next day began with a cold wind sweeping across the colony, carrying dust through the narrow streets. Ethan woke early, his mind already set on what he would do. He dressed in his standard uniform, but instead of heading to his usual patrol route, he stopped by the mess hall reserved for humans and off-world staff. There, he filled a metal tray with hot food, real food. Steaming bread, roasted meat, and a small bowl of bright red fruit slices. Then he poured 2 mugs of sweet, spiced tea. He didn't hurry, but every movement had purpose. Outside, the alien dining hall was already open, its warm light spilling into the chilly morning. The pure-blood citizens sat inside, talking over their breakfast. On the far side of the courtyard, in her usual place, Lyra sat alone with her tin bowl of gray paste. She was shivering, her hands wrapped tightly around it. Her eyes flicked toward the doorway, as if waiting for the moment they would shut it in her face again. Ethan walked straight toward her. Conversations inside the hall began to quiet as people noticed him. A human soldier was a rare enough sight here, but what really drew their attention was the tray in his hands when Ethan reached Lyra. She looked up in confusion. "Why are you here?" she asked softly. "Because you shouldn't have to eat alone," he said. Then he did something no one had done before. He sat down beside her. Gasps echoed from inside the hall. Some aliens stood to get a better view. Ethan set the tray between them and pushed one of the mugs toward her. "Here," he said. "Drink this. It's hot." Lyra froze, her hands hovering above it. "I can't," she whispered. "If they see me eating your food, they already see," Ethan interrupted, his tone calm but firm. "And I don't care." She hesitated, then slowly took the mug. The first sip made her eyes widen. It was rich, sweet, and warmer than anything she'd had in years. A faint smile touched her lips before it faded into worry. "They'll come soon," she murmured. "They always do." She was right. From inside the hall, a heavy footstep echoed. The tall alien official from yesterday emerged, flanked by 2 guards. His expression was cold and sharp. "Human," he called out. "Move away from her." Ethan didn't move. "She has the right to eat in peace," he said. The official's voice hardened. "She has no rights here. She is impure. You will leave her." Now, inside the hall, whispers spread like fire. Some were shocked, others amused, but all were waiting to see what would happen. Ethan reached for the bread on the tray and tore "Off a piece, handing half to Lyra. Eat," he said simply. Her eyes darted between him and the official. "I don't want you to get hurt," she whispered. Too late, he replied with a faint smirk. "They're already angry." The official stepped closer, towering over them. "You will regret this insult to our law," he said, his voice low with threat. Ethan looked up at him steadily. "Then your law is the problem," he replied. A ripple of shock went through the onlookers. No one spoke to a high-ranking official like that. The guards' hands tightened on their weapons. The official's jaw flexed. "If you will not move," he said, "then you will answer to the tribunal." Ethan stood slowly, his voice calm but carrying across the courtyard. "Then I'll see you there," he said. He didn't raise his voice, but his words had weight. The official glared at him for a long moment before turning sharply and walking away, the guards following close behind. Lyra was pale. "You just put yourself in danger," she whispered. Ethan sat back down, taking another bite of bread. "Good," he said. Maybe it's time someone made them angry enough to listen. For the next several minutes, they ate in silence. Some of the aliens inside pretended not to watch. Others stared openly, whispering behind their hands. Ethan ignored them all. Lyra tried to, but she could feel their eyes like cold needles in her back. When the tray was empty, Ethan stood and picked it up. "I'll walk you back," he said. Lyra shook her head quickly. "They'll follow you," she warned. "They already are," he said, nodding toward the shadows where a few figures lingered, pretending to be busy. As they walked through the courtyard, the tension was thick. Ethan could feel the weight of every stare. He didn't care if anything. It made him more certain. This wasn't going to end here. If the tribunal wanted to confront him, he would be ready when they reached the edge of the district where Lyra lived. She stopped. "You shouldn't come here," she said, her voice low. "They'll think you're choosing a side." Ethan met her gaze. "I already have," he said. Before turning and heading back toward the human quarters, Lyra stood there for a long time after he left. The cold wind swirled around her, but for once, she didn't feel completely alone. Something had changed, something she couldn't name. But it was real. For the first time in years, someone had sat beside her. For the first time in years, she didn't eat alone, and deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The following morning, the colony's central courtyard was busier than usual. Merchants set up their stalls earlier, curious whispers passing from one to another. Word had already spread. The human soldier had eaten with the half-blood girl. The act alone was enough to shake old traditions, but the fact that he had refused the order of a high-ranking official, that made it a story everyone wanted to witness the next chapter of. Lyra stayed in the shadows near her small home. She had been warned by neighbors that the council was angry. Some had even told her to run before she brought more trouble. But she didn't run. She knew she couldn't hide forever. Ethan, meanwhile, walked into the courtyard with steady steps. He wasn't in his full arm, just his patrol jacket, but his posture carried authority. His eyes scanned the crowd until he spotted Lyra standing at the edge. He gave her a small nod. It was a silent promise. "I'm not backing down." Then the deep toll of the council bell echoed through the courtyard. Every conversation stopped. From the far side, the tall alien official appeared again, flanked by guards behind him. Members of the colony council followed, 5 in total, all wearing dark robes with gold trim. They walked to the raised stone platform at the center. The crowd parted for them, forming a wide circle. The official's voice rang out. "Yesterday, this human defied our law. He sat with impurity. He shared his food with one whose blood is cursed. This cannot go unpunished." A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, others looked uneasy. Ethan stepped forward, his boots striking the stone with deliberate sound. "I didn't break a law worth following," he said. I broke cruelty, disguised as tradition. Gasps erupted. It was one thing to challenge the law quietly, it was another to call it cruelty in front of the council leader, a tall alien with silver markings across his skin, raised his hand for silence. "You are not of our kind," the leader said. His voice cold and precise. "You have no right to judge our ways." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I have every right when those ways cause harm. I saw her sitting in the rain while you feasted. I saw the way you treat her like she's less than alive. That's not culture, that's cowardice." The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Some younger aliens exchanged glances, hesitant, but intrigued. The official stepped forward. His tone sharp. "You insult our honor, human, if you truly believe you are right, then face judgment before all." Ethan looked directly at him. "Then let it be here, in front of everyone," he said. His words hung in the air like a challenge. The council leader's eyes narrowed, but after a pause, he nodded. "Very well," he said. "You will both human and half-blood stand before the tribunal now." Guards moved to fetch Lyra from the edge of the crowd. She resisted at first, her eyes wide with fear. Ethan met her gaze and gave a small shake of his head, silently telling her not to be afraid. When they stood together on the stone platform, the leader addressed the crowd. "Our law exists to protect the strength of our people. It forbids impurity from sharing the table of the pure. This human challenges that law. Let him prove his claim before us all." Ethan stepped forward. "It's simple," he said. "If your law is just, then sitting beside her should bring disaster. If your law is wrong, then nothing will happen. Let's find out which it is." A heavy silence fell. The official smirked, certain of the outcome. The leader gave a curt nod. "Then you will eat here, before the council, in front of all." The guards brought out a table-long, polished wood, usually reserved for council feasts. 2 plates were placed on it, both filled with steaming food. The scent of roasted meat and herbs filled the air. The crowd pressed closer. Every eye fixed on the scene. Ethan pulled out a chair and gestured for Lyra to sit. She hesitated, her hands trembling. "They'll hate you for this," she whispered. "They already do," he said softly. "So let's give them something worth hating." She sat, and Ethan took the seat beside her. The moment they lifted their forks, gasps rippled through the crowd. Inside the hall yesterday, it had been an act of quiet rebellion. Here, it was a direct challenge to power. They ate slowly, deliberately. Every bite was a statement. Every moment they did not collapse or fall ill was a blow to the old belief. Minutes passed. The crowd grew restless, shifting from curiosity to unease. The official's smirk began to fade. The leader's expression tightened. Ethan finished his plate and leaned back. "I feel fine," he said calmly. Lyra set down her fork, her voice steady for the first time. "So do I," a murmur spread. Some in the crowd nodded. Others frowned. The leader raised his hand, cutting off the noise. "This proves nothing," he said sharply, but even as he spoke, the doubt in the crowd was growing. Ethan stood, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "It proves enough for anyone willing to see. The only sickness here is the cruelty you've built into your law." The crowd was no longer silent. They were speaking to each other, questioning, and for the first time in years, Lyra saw something new in their eyes when they looked at her. Not just contempt, but curiosity, and maybe even the start of respect. The council leader's jaw was tight. "This is not over," he said. Ethan met his gaze without fear. "No," he said, "it's just beginning." The council chamber was colder than the courtyard outside. Tall stone walls rose high above, etched with carvings of the colony's history victories, royal bloodlines, and laws carved in flowing script. In the center stood a raised platform, where the tribunal members sat, their dark robes pooling at their feet like heavy shadows. Ethan and Lyra stood side by side before them, the space between their boots marked by a faint white line, It felt less like a meeting and more like a trial. The leader of the council leaned forward, his silver-marked face unreadable. "Yesterday you both committed an act against our law," he began. "Today, we decide the consequence." Lyra's hands were clasped in front of her, her knuckles pale. She had been here before years ago, when they had branded her as impure and stripped away her right to sit with others. The smell of the chamber, the weight of those judging Izidal, came rushing back, but this time she wasn't alone. The human stood beside her like a wall, his shoulders squared, his gaze steady. One of the robed counselors spoke, her voice sharp. "You dared to eat beside impurity in public. Human, you defied our most sacred custom." Ethan didn't flinch. "I did," he said plainly, "because your custom is built on lies and fear." Gasps rippled through the chamber. The council leader raised a hand for silence. "You insult us again," he said, his tone ice-cold. "Do you believe your single act changes generations of truth?" Ethan's voice was steady. "I believe truth is proven by action, and yesterday, your people saw the truth. Nothing happened." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You think because you ate one meal together without falling ill, the curse is broken?" Ethan shook his head slightly. "There was never a curse-only cruelty." A male counselor with a deep scar across his cheek slammed his hand on the desk. "You are not one of us. You do not decide what is cruel for our people." Ethan's reply was sharp. "When cruelty is done in public, when it's used to humiliate a child for something she never chose, it's everyone's business, no matter the species." The chamber erupted into murmurs. Some voices carried anger, others hesitation. A few younger members of the audience, loud in to witness, exchanged uncertain glances. The council leader finally leaned back in his seat. "Very well, human," he said. "If you are so sure, we will put your belief to the ultimate test." The words sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. "What test?" she whispered, but the leader's voice carried over hers. "In 3 days, the Feast of Unity will be held. It is the one time of year our entire colony dines together. If you and the half-blood girl share the high table with the council and the pure blood families, if no harm comes, the purity law will be removed." Gasps filled the chamber again. This was no small challenge. The high table was the most sacred symbol of status in the colony. Allowing Lyra to sit there would be an outrage to the old guard. Lyra's throat tightened. "They'll never let me walk in there," she said quietly. Ethan turned to her, his tone calm. "They won't have a choice." The leader's voice grew darker. "But if the people turn against you, if unrest spreads, because of your defiance, the blame will be yours and punishment will be severe." Ethan met the leader's gaze without hesitation. "Then, I accept the risk," he said. "And so do I," Lyra added, her voice soft but unshaken. For a brief moment, the leader studied her, as if searching for weakness. Then he struck the gavel against the desk. "It is decided," he said. "You will take the high table, or you will take the punishment." The guards moved forward, gesturing for Ethan and Lyra to leave as they walked out into the daylight, the murmur of the chamber still echoing behind them. Lyra let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "You know they'll do everything they can to stop us from even reaching that table," she said. Ethan nodded. "I know," he replied. "And that's why we'll make it impossible for them to stop us." They moved through the crowded streets. Already, the whispers were spreading. Some looked at Lyra with disgust, others with open curiosity. A small alien child tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed. "Is that her?" the child asked. The mother pulled the child away quickly, but not before glancing back twice. Ethan noticed, "Their eyes are changing," he said quietly. Lyra shook her head. "They're watching to see if I fall. If I stumble, they'll say the law was right." Ethan looked at her with a faint, determined smile. Then we don't stumble. That night, as the two of them sat in the small room Ethan had borrowed for safety, they planned. The Feast of Unity was only 3 days away. 3 days to prepare for the most public fight of their lives. Ethan knew it wouldn't just be about sitting at a table. It would be about breaking a tradition so deep it was written into the colony's walls. And deep down, he also knew, if they failed, it wouldn't just be Lyra who paid the price. The day of the Feast of Unity began with the sound of bells. Long, deep tones rolled over the colony, echoing through narrow streets and across the market square. Banners of deep red and gold hung from the tall stone buildings, swaying in the cold morning wind. Every path led toward the Grand Hall, an enormous structure at the center of the colony, its arched doorway framed by carved pillars and flanked by armored guards. Lyra stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands hidden inside the sleeves of the plain but clean dress Ethan had found for her. It wasn't fancy, just a soft gray with a simple belt, but it was the first new clothing she had worn in years. She felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her. Some were cold and judging, others curious. A few even seemed quietly supportive. Though they quickly looked away when caught staring, Ethan arrived beside her, dressed not in his patrol jacket, but in his formal human uniform. The silver crest on his shoulder caught the morning light. He had insisted on wearing a tiff. They wanted to accuse him. He wanted to stand as a soldier, not just a stranger. "You ready?" he asked quietly. Lyra gave a small nod, though her stomach felt tight. "Everyone's waiting to see me fail," she whispered. "Then let's make them wait forever," he replied. The guards at the entrance stiffened when they saw them approach. One stepped forward, blocking their path. "Half-bloods don't enter here," the guard said, his voice cold. Ethan didn't slow his step. "She's not here as a half-blood," he said evenly. "She's here as my guest by order of the tribunal." The guard hesitated, glancing toward the high-ranking official who stood nearby. The official's jaw tightened, but he gave a curt nod. "Let them pass," he said, though the words were bitter. The grand hall was warm and bright, the air rich with the scent of roasted meats, fresh bread, and sweet spices. Rows of long tables stretched across the room, crowded with the colony's most important families. At the far end, raised above the others, stood the high table, wide, polished, and set with gold-trimmed plates. The council sat there, their expressions unreadable, as Ethan and Lyra walked down the center aisle toward the high table. The sound in the hall shifted. Conversations lowered to whispers. Some guests turned to watch openly. Others pretended not to notice, but kept their eyes on them. Lyra kept her chin level, even though every step felt heavier than the last. Ethan walked beside her, his stride steady and unhurried. When they reached the high table, 2 empty chairs waited, one beside the council leader and one beside a alien noble whose expression was openly hostile. Ethan pulled out Lyra's chair for her, an act that caused more murmurs to ripple through the room before taking his own seat. Servants moved quickly, setting plates before them. The food was beautiful sliced roast glazed with herbs, soft bread, bowls of colorful vegetables. It was a meal Lyra had seen from a distance all her life, but never touched. The council leader's voice carried over the table. "Let it be witnessed," he said, "that the human and the impure share the high table. Let all see whether the curse will claim them." A tense silence settled as everyone began to eat. Lyra's hand hovered over her fork for a moment before Ethan gave her a small nod. She picked it up and took her first bite. The flavor was overwhelmingly rich, warm, and nothing like the bland paste she'd been given for years. But she forced herself to eat slowly, matching Ethan's pace around them. Eyes watched like hawks. Some guests leaned forward, almost eager to see a sign of illness. Others sat back, arms crossed, refusing to look at her at all. Halfway through the meal, Ethan noticed something. a faint flicker of movement from one of the servants pouring drinks. His eyes narrowed as he caught sight of a small vial hidden in the servant's palm. The servant moved toward Lyra's cup, tilting the wine pitcher just enough to pour whatever was in the vial. Ethan's hand shot out, catching the servant's wrist. The hall went silent in an instant. "What's in your hand?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but carrying across the room. The servant froze. The vial glinting in the light, gasps rose from the crowd as the council leader's expression hardened. "Guards," the leader commanded, and 2 armored figures seized the servant. The vial was taken, and a low murmur swept the room. Ethan looked at the council leader. "So much for your curse," he said. "Seems the only danger here comes from your own people." The leader's gaze was cold. "This attempt does not change the trial," he said. Though the edge in his voice betrayed him, Ethan leaned back in his chair. "It changes everything," he replied. "Because now they know something happened to her. It wouldn't be the curse, it would be murder." The rest of the meal continued under heavy silence. Every bite they took, every sip they shared, was now not just defiance, it was proof by the time they finished. Lyra's fear had shifted into something else, a quiet, growing strength. When they stood from the table, a few guests averted their eyes, but others didn't. Some even gave the faintest of nods, small but real acknowledgments. Outside, the air felt colder than before. "They tried to stop me," Lyra said softly. "They failed." Ethan replied, "Now let's see if they have the courage to keep their word." The morning after the Feast of Unity, the colony was not the same. Whispers moved faster than the cold wind through the streets. Everyone knew what had happened. The human and the half-blood had sat at the high table. They had eaten every bite, drunk every drop. No curse had struck them down. No sickness had spread, and everyone also knew about the servant caught with the vial. For the first time in years, Lyra walked through the market without shrinking into the shadows. The stares were still there, but they were different. Some were wary, some still filled with dislike, but others held something new, a spark of doubt about the old law. An older alien woman selling bread leaned forward as Lyra passed. "You were brave," she said quietly, slipping a small roll into Lyra's hands before looking away. Lyra stared at it, surprised. A week ago, no one would have dared be seen giving her food. Now, someone had done it in broad daylight. Ethan, walking beside her, noticed too. "It's starting," he said under his breath. Lyra glanced at him. "What is?" "The change," he replied. "It's small, but it's there." But not everyone welcomed it. At the far end of the market, the tall alien official stood with 2 guards, his eyes locked on Ethan and Lyra, cold and sharp. "You may have fooled some," he said as they approached, "but you haven't fooled me." Ethan stopped, his voice calm but steady. "Good," he said. "I wasn't trying to fool you. I was trying to show the truth." The official's lip curled. "The council will meet again to decide if the law will truly be removed." Lyra's stomach tightened. So even after all that, they can still keep it. The official's smirk deepened. "We can do whatever is necessary for the purity of our people." Ethan stepped closer. "Then you'll have to explain to your people why purity needs poison." The official's smirk faltered for just a moment. Before he turned and walked away, the guards followed, their heavy boots thudding against the stone as the day went on. More small moments happened. A young alien boy ran past and called, "Hi," instead of the insults she was used to. A shopkeeper didn't turn her away when she looked at his wares. A group of younger aliens whispered about how the curse might have been a lie all along. That evening, Ethan and Lyra stood outside the grand hall. The council leader himself came out to meet them. His face was unreadable. "The law," he began, "will be reviewed." Lyra's heart sank. A little reviewed wasn't the same as removed. But then the leader added, Until then, the ban on shared tables is suspended. Lyra blinked. You mean? I can eat inside. The leader nodded once. You have the human to thank for that, he said, then turned and went back inside. It wasn't a full victory. The law was still alive, waiting like a shadow, but it was the first crack in something that had seemed unbreakable. That night, Ethan walked Lyra to the small home she shared with no one. The streets were quiet, the air cold. You changed everything, she said softly. He shook his head. No, we did. Her eyes shimmered in the dim light. I never thought anyone would stand up for me, she said. Then maybe now, you can start expecting it, he replied. She smiled, small but real, for the first time. The weight on her chest felt lighter. She stepped inside, but before closing the door, she looked back at him. Ethan, what happens if they bring the law back? His answer was simple. Then we fight again. The door closed, and Ethan stood there for a moment. Staring at the stars above the alien skyline, he knew this wasn't over. The law had many defenders, and the fight for change was only beginning. But he also knew something else. One act of defiance had started a ripple, and sometimes a ripple was all it took to turn into a wave, somewhere across the colony, in small kitchens and crowded halls. People were still talking about what they had seen. The human and the half-blood sitting together, eating together, laughing together, alive. And with every telling of the story, the old belief grew weaker. For Lyra, the world was still dangerous, still full of those who hated her blood. But now, when she walked through the streets, she no longer felt invisible, no longer felt she had to keep her eyes on the ground. There was someone who had stood beside her in the open, someone who had made it clear to the entire colony that she was worth standing up for. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning, and this time she was ready to walk into whatever came next.